So let's see. Vicky, do you have a copy of the internal agenda?
Yeah.
Because I couldn't print it.
Email, so.
Yeah, but since my computer will be here,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
want to.
I can just give you my computer for this morning. I log in your email and everything, right? But I mean, I'll also. Okay, so here I've got it pulled up, and then I'm just gonna let you have this, because you need a computer, right? So you can log into your Gmail, whatever else, right? So just take over, but here it is. And if you go
But
back.
you don't need it.
No, I got you.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'll keep an eye on it. I'll get somebody else to pull it up, so I keep an eye on it.
Perfect.
You need to computer more than I do. Yes, I would have been using it, but you need it more than I do. I also would have logged into the Zoom. But I'll get some of it. Dewei's here. He'll be on the Zoom and all this. Think I'll sit next to him. It's 5 to 9, but no one's here. What does that mean?
Morning. Can you out of the I mean
Oh, somebody's.
join your
What?
can you join the
I don't know. I might have to register.
oh yeah you're right because I you actually want to know
Right, so maybe what we have to do is always put.
you
me
can
as-
just
You're right, that's it. Maybe what we need to do is always put me as
yeah
a virtual attendee.
don't worry I can do that.
Okay. Okay, how you doing? Good?
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
All right, now we can get started.
Yeah, I had to leave a little early, like, I'll do that.
Yeah. And oh my god, I was watching the news to see if your son was on the. when
It was stuck here.
It was on the news. I was looking for you guys in the pickup. They were, they had a picture.
Well, even though when they return.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, did you go to pick him up?
Yeah.
Did you see the news? there?
I definitely watched it. Actually, we got friends from China.
Oh,
They also, yes.
so is he in sixth grade? That's a good grade.
Exactly for the,
Fifth was my favorite.
uh,
Fifth grade
Oh,
was my
fifth
favorite
grade
of my life.
yeah.
Fifth, sixth, and seventh, I think were my favorites.
Okay.
Then I got jaded,
Okay, yeah, secret, can take you a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Good morning. Hey, how are you?
Morning. Morning.
So, Lawrence, are you going to have it today or maybe not?
I don't think
I'm not taking offended. He's in that house too.
Oh, yeah.
yeah it's from
Thank you.
10 to 11
Thank you.
I'm not taking attendance. This is a pretty kind of media.
Thank you for sharing him
Yeah.
with us.
Appreciate his presence in my class, but.
I always have it will be the only way
Yeah, if you pay him.
Yeah.
I did. See, I paid him.
Oh, yeah, official.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm serious, I'm joking.
yeah, I know.
Serious.
I know, but I
Yeah.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, he's not.
That makes sense.
He's not. No.
hello
Okay, well, I just remembered that we got some that wasn't, remember you didn't like. Give me a little bit.
You have a really nice bag. Is this yours?
I made that.
You?
I did. It was
Seriously?
obviously right there.
Oh, with all the decorations?
These were my daughter's sheets when she was in school, and this was a Delta version.
Wow, that's a nice way of recycling this artistic.
And look, I want you to, and I know it's changed, but I want you to look at it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
It is. Probably, I don't know,
It's
it's really,
big.
it is, right? Big, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some. This is the.
What I did was I started buying rice based on that. I wanted to make something out of it, but rice we have now doesn't really know.
This is the best shopping bag, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty spacious.
Getting for 99 inch. Florence, is Steve in the room?
yeah
You let him in? Talk to him?
yeah
I would let him in and.
Oh, good.
hello Steve, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You,
Okay, let us prepare this because we are not hearing you.
Okay. There's often a problem in the beginning setting this
Yeah,
up.
exactly
Is Jared there? He may know what to do.
Yes.
So ask Steve. Hello, Steve. Could you
Yeah.
try to speak now?
Yeah, I'm speaking now.
Yeah, I can hear from.
Perfect.
I can only see.
It's working.
Oh, okay, good, good. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We will wait a little bit because we are waiting for people to get here.
Okay, how many people are in the room?
So right now we are in 7.
Okay,
Yeah, we will wait a couple of minutes.
okay, sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Uh,
Okay, hello. So sorry about being quite late. We were just preparing the room. So we are ready to start, and I will give the word to Steve to present this session. Hello, everyone.
okay, thanks, Lawrence, and good morning, everyone. Vicky has asked me to do the honors this morning in providing a brief introduction. So welcome to our Winter 2023 Emerging Scholars Transportation Research Showcase. I'm Stephen Ritchie, Director of ITS-Irvine and Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Today's event is actually part of a 3-part annual series of events that's supporting and showcasing the work of our ITS-Irvine students, who are the scholars and leaders of tomorrow. In summer and fall, we have what we call our transportation undergraduate research assistant program, TURAP, which culminates in a showcase of project presentations. And in winter, today's event, we have our emerging scholars transportation research showcase. And in spring, we'll have our doctoral transportation research showcase. And this year is going to be held on May 5th. I hope everyone can attend. that on May 5th. So today's showcase offers our UCI undergraduate and master's level transportation students the opportunity to share their research in a more formal style of presentation. Our presenters today represent several diverse fields: business economics, urban studies, and urban and regional planning, I think reflecting the interdisciplinary nature of our field as well as that of ITS. Two of our presenters were also part of this year's TURAP program. Special congratulations go to Dylan Ando and Mankin Law, who here today, who each presented their research at TRB this year, which is awesome. And we congratulate Mankin Law and Casey Chung, who will be completing their studies this spring. Each presenter has conducted their research under the guidance of ITS faculty advisors. And so we thank the ITS faculty who have advised today's presenters, and they are Professor Jayrakrishna of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Professor Avipsa Roy of Urban Planning and Public Policy. In addition to faculty guidance, each of our undergraduate student presenters is matched with an ITS-Irvine graduate student who provides advice and mentorship to the students as they prepare their presentations and plan their studies and careers. So we thank those mentors who guided today's presenters, Dewei, Xiao, Montana Rodriguez, and Shakib, Kafashan. And I would also like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, co-sponsors today, the ITS Graduate Student Association, our Pacific Southwest Region University Transportation Center, as some of you may know, which was just renewed by US DOT for 5 years, which we're delighted about. Our UCITS Statewide Transportation Research Program, and our UCITS Resilient and Innovative Mobility Initiative, known as REMI. And also special thanks go to Dr. Vicky de Guzman of ITS for her role in organizing today's event. In addition to today's student presentations, very pleased that our host, you'll see meet in a moment, Dr. Dingtong Yang, will be presenting a special keynote address, and I believe providing some words of inspiration for our emerging scholars. So over to you, Dingtong.
Yeah, hopefully now everyone can hear everything. So it's you're working just testing.
So this is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, audio just came on.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Casey Chung and I'm currently a fourth year business economics and urban studies major here at UCI. And today I'll be presenting my two research topics that are going, but they're both advised by Professor Avipsa from the Stamp Lab. And the first topic will be on a story map regarding housing affordability issues in Los Angeles County. And the second topic will be on exploring how infrastructure access and the built environment affects bicycling safety in Orange County. So I chose to present both topics today since I started working on the story map over the summer as a part of ITS-Irvine's undergraduate research and research program. But I started off in the Stamp Lab researching bike infrastructure equity issues in Orange County as a part of my field study over last spring quarter, and I'm still currently revising it over and we're working to publish it soon. No.
It should sometimes. Otherwise, you can just use the yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll just use this. Okay.
Yeah.
So to preface, the COVID-19 pandemic has negatively affected almost every single person worldwide for the past 3 years, especially in terms of health, housing, and employment. Los Angeles County was an area of interest primarily for its status as one of the top cities in the United States experiencing the most homelessness, has historically high rates of housing burden and population density, and being the county that suffered from the most COVID-19 related cases and deaths in California. And its location proximity to UCI makes it relevant for us to study as well. In addition to this, Los Angeles has already been suffering from housing affordability issues pre-pandemic due to things like gentrification, rising rent costs, and etc. However, the presence of the COVID-19 pandemic has recently exacerbated this issue. In the story map, we worked to identify which areas in particular in Los Angeles County that were the most susceptible to housing affordability issues after the introduction of the pandemic. In addition to this, we also looked at the demographic data of these areas to see which groups of people in particular, so in terms of things like ethnicity, median household income, and etc., were burdened by these issues. This research was done for the story map was to support the research that Professor Roy is currently conducting with her PhD student that's focusing on exploring spatial distribution of sheltered homelessness across different socioeconomic groups during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the two main variables that we chose to utilize were the COVID-19 case counts and homelessness counts in order to examine them at the census block group date level to spatially understand the magnitude of the spread of the disease more locally in order to gain a more comprehensive insight on the effects that COVID-19 had on housing affordability in Los Angeles County. So the homelessness county data was sourced from the LA Homeless Services Authority, and it ranges from 2017 to 2020. So this doesn't include any recent data from 2021 to 2023. And the components of the homeless counts were comprised of 4 different factors, which were street count, shelter count, youth count, and demographic survey. The COVID-19 density data was sourced from the Autonomous Networks Research Group from the Viterbi School of Engineering from USC. They had a GitHub where they cited press releases from the Los Angeles Department of Public Health as their source, where they collected data for the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in different Los Angeles cities and communities. And this data was relevant from March 2020 to August 2021. So this also doesn't include recent data till 2023. We later identified the top 3 communities in Los Angeles County that were the most burdened by housing affordability issues and overlaid the social vulnerability index data in order to get a better understanding of who was exactly most affected by the pandemic in terms of ethnicity, poverty status, age, etc. And this data was sourced from the Agency of Toxic Substances Registry. So in summary, we basically ran a kernel density estimation on the COVID-19 count data, which can be seen in the top left group. using the COVID-19 count data set using ArcGIS Pro, which was then spatially joined to the homelessness count data set, and then afterwards spatially joined back to the census tracts in order to produce that map in the bottom right corner. Can't really see that well, but each census tract was color coded, ranging from colors of like red, orange, yellow, green, from the darkest red being the census tracts with the highest concentrations of homelessness and susceptibility to housing affordability issues. And I think it was light green for the lowest concentrations. And from there, we identified several communities that seem to be experiencing the most housing affordability issues based on the map data, and made other qualitative analyses as well. This was all later moved to ArcGIS Online and displayed on a story map. So our results yielded that populations at higher risk of contracting COVID-19 and suffering from homelessness was generally in more population dense metropolitan areas than lower population dense suburban areas. This connects back to the general idea that people in these metropolitan areas are more at risk from suffering from housing affordability issues and health complications. This also raises concern over what groups of people in particular these issues are affecting, since Los Angeles County is home to large numbers of people of color, but also to historically Black and Hispanic communities in particular. I listed a number of communities with the highest concentrations of homelessness on the screen right here, but the most relevant to the study are the top 3 communities down here, with the highest susceptibility to housing affordability issues that were identified. These cities were the cities of downtown Los Angeles, North Hollywood, and the city of Bell. These areas seem to be the most affected were the ones with generally high minority and people of color concentrations. So I just attached some screenshots from the story map displaying data from these top 3 communities just to display the data visually in this presentation. So just there. And I also attached a screenshot of the social vulnerability index that we use. The actual index takes into account of a wide range of variables, but I selected 16 from that list that seemed to be the most pertinent to our research. That was basically the percentages of people experiencing poverty, unemployment, housing burden, minority, and person of color status, and age. I also attached some screenshots, from the story map regarding those numbers for each of the 3 communities that was earlier identified, and the results of the 16 variables selected from the social vulnerability index in order to draw appropriate conclusions that will be explained on the next slide. So based on the data from the social vulnerability index, it could be seen that these communities in particular or generally have higher percentages of minority and specifically Hispanic populations, with half, if not more, identifying as either of the 2. Additionally, at least a third of the population was also reported to have been experiencing housing costs that were burdening occupied housing units with an annual income less than $75,000. So 30% or more of the income was spent on housing costs, and or being considered to be 150% below the poverty level estimate. So from these findings alone, this supports our earlier assumption that minority populations, specifically Hispanic communities, are typically more susceptible to being disproportionately affected by housing affordability issues in Los Angeles County. So for my second topic, it was on my research paper on exploring how infrastructure access in the built environment affects bicycle safety in Orange County. I attached my abstract here. I know it's a long block of text, but I think it really nicely summarizes the research that I've done. So it reads, the inaccessibility of safe bicycling routes in Orange County, California, highlights the existing inequities present in the area, with people from lower socioeconomic statuses being disproportionately affected by the lack of appropriate bicycle infrastructure. In this study, we explored how bicycle ridership varies spatially in our study area in connection to median household income, ethnicity, poverty levels, gender, availability of different bike infrastructure, and land use types. Additionally, we placed a greater focus on communities of concern, namely Santa Ana and Midway City and contrasted those with cities having sufficient amenities like Irvine and Newport Beach. So for the methods, we use OCTA bikeway and count data in conjunction with SCAG uploaded data sets on median household income, demographics, and communities of concern. The bikeways were classified as either class 1, 2, 3, or 4, which are displayed on the side of the screen, accompanied with some photos that we took during field work, in order to show a visual representation of each class. So class 1 are off-street paved bike paths. Class 2 is on-street striped and signed bicycle lanes. Class 3 was on-street shared bike lanes, signed bicycle routes, and class 4 were cycle tracks, so on-street and separated bikeways. These distinctions helped us determine the safety of each bikeway, with class 2 and 4 being generally the more safer options. We determined the 2 cities that were considered more lower income. So those 2 were labeled as communities of concern by SCAG. These 2 were both Santa Ana and Midway City. And then we contrasted those with 3 considerably wealthier cities, which were Irvine, Newport Beach, and Costa Mesa. In all 5 cities, we compared the availability, which was the quantity aspect, and the safety, which was the quality aspect of the bikeways made available, and then later compared demographic data to see if there was a positive correlation between the offering of bike amenities to the general socioeconomic status of the city. So our results yielded that the higher density of bicycling ridership based on OCTA official accounts occurred in and around in the cities of Irvine, Costa Mesa, and Newport Beach, Orange, Lake Forest, and also Rancho Margarita, Santa Margarita, which is visually represented in the heat map on the top right corner of the screen. And all of these cities listed belong to generally more higher socioeconomic statuses, as they belong to areas of a median household income of around 58K to 250K. Additionally, environmental justice areas matched up with areas of lower socioeconomic statuses as well, as it's visually represented in the map in the bottom right corner of the screen. And yeah, so our results is that, so when we specifically focus on the 2 cities of Santa Ana and Newport Beach in particular to serve as our representative higher income and lower income cities in Orange County, in order to draw some conclusions on whether or not socioeconomic status and factors can significantly contribute to the establishment of safer and or more extensive bikeways. From the 2 heat maps on the right, so the top is Newport Beach and the bottom is Santa Ana. We determined that cyclists generally utilize the more safer class 2 and class 4 bikeways more frequently in both cities, with more usages of bike amenities in Santa Ana, but this could be explained by the fact that Santa Ana has higher bike counts than Newport Beach due to their availability of the safer class 4 bikeways in part, shown in many parts of the city, which is represented by the purple. So we also compared and contrasted 4 different minority populations of Black and African American, Asian, Hispanic, and American Indian / Alaska Native in order to conclude whether these groups were being disproportionately affected by bike placement availability. Addressing these communities of concern in particular, we found that all 4 demographics had a higher density in areas surrounding Midway City, since there's no actual data for Midway City. And additionally, there was a highly dense Hispanic population in Santa Ana as well. This supported our hypotheses that the minority groups are being disproportionately affected by the lack of equitable bike infrastructure. And to continue on, the class 2 bike lane is established the most frequently in Orange County, as you can see in this graph on this left. The amount of bike ridership was found to be relatively proportionate to the number of each bikeway available. And additionally, there seems to be more proposed new bikeways in cities of generally higher socioeconomic statuses in comparison to the indicated communities of concern, as you can see on the right. And again, it's to note that Santa Ana has higher bike counts than Newport Beach due to their availability of more safer class 4 bikeways in parts of the city, and there was no data made available for Midway City as well. So based on the data and on the side right here and the fieldwork that was done, we found that the higher income cities had more availability of these bike infrastructures than their lower income counterparts, which resulted in higher amounts of bike ridership. The biggest takeaway was that although there is a necessity for both safer and extensive bikeways overall, there seems to be a greater necessity for more extensive bikeways made available to encourage an increase in bike ridership. Thank you.
So,
Thanks, Casey, for that presentation. And let's take some questions from the audience and also from the Zoom part. Yeah, for our audience on Zoom, if you have any questions, just kindly type it in the chat box. I have a question for Casey. So in the second presentation, you mentioned about the bike lane usage.
Yes.
So for the how did you actually collect the bike count, and how those are those bike trips mainly used for commuting or used for recreation? Do you have certain kind of data for that one?
Yeah, Professor Roy provided me the bike count data, but it was sourced from OCTA, and I think they're generally more used for commuting purposes. But I think actually it incorporates all of it. It uses like weekday and week and
Right.
bike ridership, and also with like female, male, all that. So not exactly sure how the data was sourced, but it was from OCTA and Professor provided it to me.
Yeah, I think if the we can obtain more entrance of the data source to see, especially you mentioned on which day the trip happened and especially what time the trip actually happened,
Yeah.
whether it's morning, afternoon peak or during some other time, then we have a better idea of how those trips are actually commuting trips or actually recreation trips. Because I certainly feel for, especially for different areas, the usage of bike would be different, because I don't know whether more people with higher household income may use that for recreation or they may use that for commuting. It also depending on how far they live from their working places. So with more data entry, we may have a better idea of that.
We're working to expand the research right now on this data with like intersection counts and everything. So yeah, we're gonna expand that part in the paper, definitely.
yeah, so I think we have a couple of questions. Professor McNally would like to ask you some direct questions through the chat. So he's unmuting himself.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple questions or comments regarding the last couple slides when you were associating the level of, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
When you were associating the level of bike ridership with various demographic characteristics. And of course, those are important. But I think one of the things that I didn't hear you say were a couple of the factors that are critically important. One of them, for example, is age of the city. The city of Irvine was built at a point from a perspective of planning where there were going to be bike lanes provided on every major street in the city, and they've accomplished that. Also, the city of Irvine was built in an agricultural area where there were lots of tree breaks, eucalyptus trees, et cetera, and a lot of drainage channels. And these were actually turned into off-road bikeways, which again can increase the total level of ridership there. On the other hand, Santa Ana existed long before that as a grid system and didn't have a lot of those advantages of being developed. And by the way, Santa Ana, because of its grid system, in fact, North County in general, leans itself much more toward bus transit, which tends to work on those sorts of systems, whereas maybe Irvine's a little more heavily engaged in biking as a proportion because it does not have a network that's compatible with transit use. And the other factor I wanted to mention was that the various drainage channels or rivers, et cetera, Santa Ana River, San Diego Creek, et cetera, tend to have bikeways along them. And those bikeways may be more oriented toward, as someone else pointed out, recreational use more than commuting use. And that really depends on where the jobs are. And that comes back to my very last comment, which is I've seen studies done by OCTA in the past where they don't go the necessary step for understanding the demographics, and that is, it doesn't really make any difference how many jobs are located in a certain area, and it doesn't really make any difference how many people live in a certain area. It's the combination of the two. How many people are, for example, commuting between a residential area and a work area, and is that commute something that can be accommodated via biking? And I think that's the thing that has to be looked at, the two-dimensional thing, not a one-dimensional thing. But I wanted you to see if you could answer the question relative to the age of the city, the presence of natural features that allow for biking.
We didn't actually take those into account. You raise a really good point. I do think that we should explore that more in the paper. So thank you for that.
Sure.
And another question from Professor Stephen Ricci is he has a comment that class 3 and 4 were safer, but wouldn't it be class 1 be the safest?
I put class 2 and class 4 as the safest, since class 4 was the designated with like an actual physical separation. Class 3 was the unsafest since it was shared on the road with the cars. So as like an example of that was like PCH and stuff near, I think, Newport Beach. So those were, I think that also explains the general lower amounts of bike ridership seen in Newport Beach, since a lot of their bike infrastructures were shared on the road with the cars. Bike lane, like class 1, could be the safest. But I think we just determined that since generally class 2 and class 4 were just more used for more commuting purposes, since we're focusing a little more on the commuting aspect than recreational aspects. And just availability of class 1 is just a little more less, since that's more typically prevalent in like beach cities and stuff. So it's like along the beach with like pedestrians and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Any more questions? Yeah, Professor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. I need to leave now. Yeah, thanks for sharing really timely presentation. So getting to the bike problem and in the study, did you guys look into the bikes on the sidewalks? You know, like it's by the traffic law.
Like
in
when-
cities on the sidewalks, actually.
On the sidewalks.
To share the sidewalk with the pedestrians. And actually, I'm biking a lot, and especially taking the kids. And I feel some bike lanes too narrow, to the street, and especially cutting through the right turn lane. That's very dangerous. We would rather, for at least for strength, we would ride on the sidewalks. I'm wondering if you guys have any data on the use of sidewalks. Definitely, this leads to some conflicts.
Yeah.
Definitely not understand that actually it is legal to use sidewalks.
I don't think we actually took that like data into account, since it didn't go into either of the 4 bike lane classifications. I do think the only times that it would count when you share with a pedestrian would be the class 1 bikeway. But in the cases where a biker would be using the sidewalk instead of the designated bike lane, I don't think we took that into account in the study.
Yeah, the some sidewalks just too narrow. And
Yeah.
Because and probably especially when you're the high school,
Yeah.
it's just
The one down Culver.
Divide.
Yeah,
And even the driver will be scared.
yeah, I agree.
Then another one for the you got the data on the homeless count. I'm wondering that homeless, I can imagine it would be very dynamic, location, season by season. I'm wondering the counts would be kind of annual, average or over a certain period of time.
The homeless counts were based on an average, but on like a given point in time. So a given point in time, yeah.
So that might not.
Yeah.
There might be high variation.
Yeah, there might be a higher variation. It was just like an average based on that.
At one point.
One
not
point in time.
Like 3 months.
Not exactly sure when, because we sourced that from like the LA homelessness services, but they did indicate that it was in like a specific given point in time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But I understand.
This one is blocking the
Where there's 3 or 4 seasons like
Yeah.
that. And but thanks a lot. I had a question on you seem to point to a lot of the times like oh high minority population and this supports our hypothesis, but being in Southern California, almost every housing tract is majority minority, and this whole area is majority Hispanic. So saying that it's a majority Hispanic, it supports our hypothesis. I don't understand how that's meaningful considering basically everywhere would be that.
I don't think it's everywhere, because when we're looking at the homelessness counts, there are census tracts where there was higher, very like, I guess like populations of white and Caucasian in Los Angeles County, even though historically it is more generally higher in populations in Hispanic and Black, African American populations. But I pointed out the Hispanic communities in particular, even though there are generally a lot because we're in Southern California, just because, again, like I mentioned, there are really like historically Hispanic and Black/African communities in Los Angeles County when we're looking at housing affordability issues, but it seems to affect more the Hispanic communities than the ones that were like majority Black and African.
Because like when I was looking at it, the communities you put like West Hollywood or North Hollywood and North Hollywood and some other ones, they were like 60% Hispanic, which for LA County is low. I mean, East LA, the whole half the county is like most housing starts are over 90% Hispanic. So if we were looking at like it being a problem in those neighborhoods, wouldn't we expect it to be there? Instead of like, I mean, like I said, some of the neighborhoods you picked up some of the highest Caucasian concentrations in LA County.
Yeah, even though like places like East LA do have like more concentration of Hispanic, I guess like what I was just saying that from the commonalities of those three specific census tracts did have high populations of Hispanic communities, but it's not generally saying that all Hispanic communities are like, I guess, susceptible to these like high levels of housing affordability issues. I just wanted to point out more specifically for those census tracts in particular.
So I wonder how I get data from those homeless, like from like their race, their group, like you do a survey to them.
It was sourced from the Los Angeles Homelessness Authority, so I'm not exactly sure how that was sourced. They did mention it in like their thing about like collecting from like youth counts, shelter groups, and like I guess like maybe they did say street counts, so I'm thinking that they probably like counted it at a given point of time. And like also demographic study as well, but we didn't personally collect the data.
Okay, another one more question that I'm really interested in is that do you plan to consider how those like where those homeless come from? Like what things like the affordability of the housing, there are two sources after like COVID, after the COVID. Like so first one is that they lose their job, so their income actually reduced. And the rents keep the same, so they may be homeless. And the other one is that actually that's the common like scenario in R1. Like actually the housing rents increase a lot, and their original income is like just enough for them to cover the rent at that time. So when the rent increase a lot, they are forced to lose their housing. So, and the third source from those homeless is that maybe they move from other states to California. So, do you plan to consider like the source of like how those people become homeless, and how like from this perspective we can see that like how those like the minority group. Is that because their original income is very low and just enough to cover a quite low housing rents, or because most of those minority people lose their job during the COVID pandemic?
Okay, I think what you're asking is that if there's like the sources of homelessness from like COVID and then it's demigrated, right? Or like I guess from a different area. We didn't take into account of like people moving to the county, since like I guess from the homelessness counts that we use, It was just based on like what they've seen in the shelters and also like on the streets and also from demographic survey as well. They didn't necessarily like, I guess, take into consideration where exactly they came from, but in our study, we're introducing the variable of like housing affordability from the COVID-19 pandemic. So from there, I kind of forgot what you're asking so long.
I mean, how they become homeless and they consider like, is that because their original income is very low and the rent increase, or is because the range does not change a lot. However, they lost their job.
I think taking into consideration both factors, since the rent did increase from the pandemic and then we're introducing that new variable into our study. But then the people who already were homeless from already like high levels of rent, who were homeless because of that, I guess they're already like part of the homelessness count that we were exploring in that study.
So actually, they don't really care about how they become.
No. But we were looking at specifically like COVID-19, like the effects. I guess that's like one of the sources of how they became homeless for some of them. But generally the whole data set doesn't cover like exactly all the sources.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions. And I really like the discussion over here, but we have to move on to our second presenter. And thanks, Casey, for the presentation, and thanks for all the questions. Thank you. So our second presenter is Dylan, and his topic is on the equity issue in transit agency and PNC partnership. So the stage is yours, Dylan.
Thank you.
Does the clicker work, or should I be using the?
Yeah, we have to use this.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. Oh, let me share the screen. Yeah, so the update.
Hello, my name is Dylan Ando. I'm a second-year undergrad urban studies student, and I did my research under Professor Jay on equity in transit agencies and PNC partnerships, exploring the benefits from service placement. This was a poster presentation I presented and was accepted for TRB, and this is kind of going over the process and what the poster consisted of. So, to start, to give some background and context, transportation network companies, or TNCs, are basically Uber or Lyft. They're the online or app-based services that provide on-demand transit through private drivers to individuals. The service by itself can sometimes compete with public transit, but it has the added benefits of convenience and the on-demand access to it. Now, partnerships, on the other hand, are between transit agencies and these TNC services, where these services are subsidized either along routes or in zones to either improve public perception, provide first and last mile connections, or replace unproductive services. These partnerships help to address some of the disparities of TNCs by themselves, while also maintaining a sense of efficiency and whatnot. So, to start with this process, this research began over the summer, the TIREP program, where under Professor Jay, I worked and created a qualitative research report on TNC and these partnerships. Basically, I would go over and analyze these contracts and look and evaluate their effectiveness and ability for access. So here's an example of the table of partnerships I made. The table in its entirety was consisted of around 15 different partnerships. But yeah, basically, I just tried to kind of define some of the important characteristics, looked at the payment plans and see if that, supported people using TNC services or in this partnership, while also making sure the program's not being abused, while so that people aren't just taking TNC trips they would otherwise already take. And then also ensuring that there's the equitable access of it and it's overall a successful program. So this kind of For example, this is just an example of a partnership real quick. This is from Nagin and Professor Jay's research who I worked with, but this is just an example of a TNC partnership alongside a route where an unproductive service was replaced due to the cost per rider being too high. And instead, there being a truncation point where it translates from TNC to bus ridership. As you can see, from away from downtown, from the low density suburb, the TNCs can operate, while coming from the higher density downtown, the bus service is better suited for the higher demand. So this research, in particular, these two partnerships were some of the leading inspirations to questioning more about the equity aspects of these partnerships. So, for example, King County Metro, which is up in Seattle, their program Vehicle Transit focused on service zones where one end of the subsidized trip is at a designated transit, work, or school hub. This partnership struggled with people of color and low-income riders, with, for example, one survey indicating that 58% of VIA ridership respondents were white, despite only 32% of the population in these service zones fitting those demographics. And then LA Metro's MOD partnership, or Mobility on Demand partnership, which also partnered with VIA, found service zones that main goal were first and last mile connections with an emphasis on equal access. Both suffered from the underrepresentation of people of color and low-income users, despite explicit goals in their designs. So, and that's also just a map of the Seattle's VIA Transit example, and just how the service zones example operates. So this brings me to the main research question of my research for the poster presentation, which is through analyzing TNC ridership characteristics and spatial patterns of TNC trips, well-designed policy initiatives can be designed to reach underserved communities in the context of a TNC partnership. So a lot of this research was more so qualitative and just analyzing kind of the patterns and spatial demographics. So kind of the big questions guiding this research question in my research was what is the potential placement of service zones in the context of equity? How can service zones kind of address this disparity, and how much of this does can it have an impact on? In addition, I also wanted to analyze factors beyond access to technology, or basically the digital divide that comes with a lack of familiarity or accessibility with on-demand or app-based or online services that influences TNC usage. I wanted to look beyond that because that already, as it is one of the main factors associated with that disparities. And then I also just wanted to look at the demographic and spatial concentration of TNC usage. So for my data, I use the, there's not supposed to be U, but it's the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning's My Daily Travel Survey, which basically documented households and their TNC trips over that period. So moving on to my poster itself. This was the poster I submitted and presented. I'm more so showing it just so it's out there, as a lot of the information is already covered or will be covered. So now to look more at the figures themselves, which was the main gist of the presentation. So these first two figures focus on mapping transit accessibility. Transit accessibility was a metric given by the CMAP agency as well. This was calculated using transit frequency, direct access to connections, pedestrian friendliness, and the location of bus stops in regards to areas and their access to it. So the first one, the first figure looked at total trips, while the second figure looked at home-based trips. This is so we can get an idea of looking at all the trips in general and where those are taking place versus like where people are coming from and where those people are more so located. So as you can see, the pattern here highly correlates with the high transit availability, which reflects the existing research on TNC usage, where oftentimes TNCs compete with areas of high public transit and act as a almost secondary network of transportation. So in the context of, in a similar sense, figure 2 also displays that, but in a less pronounced manner. So in the context of partnerships, TNCs by themselves are populated in these regions, but that's kind of antithetical to what public transit agencies want to achieve. So they have to find a balance between where there's a decent demand of TNC services, while also not necessarily competing with the higher areas of public transit, as it would be more efficient to run the larger buses and whatnot. So moving on to these 2 other figures, this is the percent Black and Asian compared to home-based trips, or basically a percent non-white. And here we're looking at the pattern, and as you can see, it's more so concentrated in areas with less people of color. Yeah, this is kind of, again, a common trend within these partnerships where there's more of that disparity. And in the context of partnerships, service zones should make sure to kind of put emphasis on these zones so that subsidies can be provided and that these demographics that are underrepresented can have greater access and kind of the support needed so that they could utilize this newfound technology. In addition, marketing and outreach is an important part, and seeing data like this is important when it comes to knowing which communities one should focus on and would need extra assistance to ensure that they can utilize the service to its entirety. Figure 4 looks at the median household income compared to home-based trips. Now, as you can see, most trips are congregated down in the downtown core, which has a higher median household income. This is, again, a common trend among ridership, usage and partnerships, and TNC usage in general, where most trips are taken by higher income individuals and in higher income areas. Part of this is the fact that it costs a decent amount of money by itself, but partnerships can reduce that through fair pricing systems. In addition, when it comes to these factors, lower income people oftentimes use TNCs for a different purpose. So TNC usage for low income peoples is often for essential trips, where they would be taking TNCs as either a supplement to the existing fixed route network because there's, let's say, off hours late at night, or there's just not anything scheduled at the time. While higher income people kind of more so compete with the existing fixed route service. So in addition, when it comes to the fare structuring process, smaller things in partnerships, like having a low cost fare, for example, $5 in one partnership in Pinellas County, that was a strategy used to encourage short-term trips. However, at the same time, that can be especially penalizing to lower income people because the subsidy is limited in that regard and isn't as simple as just a flat $1 fee, though it can be successful in encouraging that type of short-term trips. So looking forward, we also have a figure mapping out the ratio of males to the population, or basically gender. This figure was somewhat it was not statistically significant. It didn't really show any real important findings, but I included it because gender has an important role when it comes to TNC usage. Oftentimes women use TNCs in regards to safety at late night hours and when public transit isn't either as available or it just feels more unsafe to use. On this scale of the census tracts blocks, that information can't really be discerned. Figure 6, on the other hand, looks at median age compared to individuals. Individuals are used here, I forgot to mention, but individuals are used here just because this is specific demographics that can be associated to each individual person that was in the data source. So yeah, looking here, there's median age, and again, it concentrates in people under the age of 36 and basically just younger people in general, which again matches the general research. when it comes to these partnerships in the context of age, older people still need access to public transit, and the on-demand services can be especially helpful for them. However, at the same time, there is that digital divide mentioned, but there's also an important part when designing these partnerships to kind of address the different transit needs for these individuals. For example, things like access to hospitals or whatnot may sometimes be ignored when they could be particularly beneficial to older groups who are less seen in these statistics. So the conclusions for this was that TNC usage was concentrated in areas with greater transit accessibility, European racial makeup, higher income, and children and young adults. What this means in the context of a partnership is that there has to be an intentional balance between TNC demand and existing fixed route networks, so that there isn't any unnecessary competition, and that the cost per rider remains reasonable enough that TNCs can be used in these scenarios. In addition, there has to be an equitable distribution of these partnership service zones, and also subsidies, so that these groups have the access and they have the resources to use these TNC services. And in addition, on top of that, marketing and outreach is important to this, to making sure that certain communities and other groups are aware and have access to these services. So further studies, I think it would be good to have more of a statistically significant and relationship modeling look at some of these variables and seeing how they relate to each other and how they contribute to TNC ridership, especially in the context of a partnership. Sadly, this was one of the big letdowns when looking for databases, was I could not find anything from any active partnerships. Instead, I had to kind of look at existing TNC data. But anyways, in the future, it would be nice that instead of just looking at demographic variables, to also look at patterns in the urban form and demographics, so that we can have more of a qualitative assessment of how people are using certain areas and where they would need to go and where shortcomings are. For example, that includes bike lanes, walking experience, and things like access to transit stations. So another factor that would be nice to consider is just the context of different partnership styles. Like, for example, the one example earlier in the presentation was routes, but I was mainly considering this analysis under the idea of service zones. In addition, this was something that I found interesting and wants to pursue, but this equity accessibility framework for TNC partnerships in previous research was basically just doing part of that modeling, where they're just seeing the associations in struggling and disadvantaged zones with ridership, and they're just trying to find the variables that associate with increased and improved transit ridership or TNC ridership for these individuals, which is something I would love to be able to expand on. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan, for the presentation. And we will take, due to the time limit, we may only take 1 or 2 questions from the audience and the chat box. So anyone here?
No. I don't really see any questions from chat box, but I have a question for Dylan. So in one of your slides, you show that the usage of TNC is also in an area where transit is concentrated.
Yes.
So do you think, because I don't really know in the study area how they actually use the transit agency subsidized TNC kind of service? Do they still need a smartphone, or do they really need a smartphone to do the reservation, or it's just like bus, you go somewhere, they have a kind of semi-fixed schedule? Because if you require some underrepresented group or low-income group also to use smartphone to do the reservation, to do all the same, maybe they actually do not have smartphone, or they actually do not have the facility or the thing needs to access to the service. So do you think that's part of the reason that the usage of TNC also positively correlated with the concentration of the transit service?
Partially. Yeah. So when it comes to transit service in the relationship of phones and stuff, in this instance, we were just there is no partnership here in this case. It's more so just because of that reason still, where people don't have access to phones or just aren't familiar with apps, so they end up using these the fixed route services more, and that's kind of why you see some of the disparity in those demographics. But when it comes to smartphones in a partnership, oftentimes partnerships offer things like call centers, or they offer some sort of yeah, mainly call centers is the way where people can schedule these, because one of the main factors about these partnerships, unless it's something like micro transit or like van pool, is that it's going to end up being you have to schedule it, and you have to like schedule it in the moment you want to travel. You can't really schedule it in advance, so you do need kind of those either an online familiarity or at least a phone to call the call center and schedule it for you.
Right. And I see Professor Robin Keller has some comments in the chat box, and it's kind of long. Professor Keller, would you like to talk?
Well, my last comment was, I think, more relevant right now. I was just giving you examples of papers on equity or spatial models. But the question now is, if it's Uber is one of these partners, don't you need to have a credit card and a phone and an app? So maybe people that are challenged don't have a credit card.
Yeah, that was also a big issue. I didn't mention it in the presentation, but unbanked and non-English language speaking people, they're also kind of a big like underserved demographic in this regard. So when it comes to your question about those who are unbanked, yeah, that is an issue. And some partnerships, I think when it comes with the bigger ones like Uber or Lyft, they don't really offer that service. However, for like smaller and more specialized TNC companies like Via, who have an emphasis on partnerships, they do have a way where you can, in some partnerships, you can connect your like bus card or transit card that has funds, and they have cash loading facilities at places like gas stations or like convenience stores or other areas in the community that people often go to, so that individuals can load on cash. But you're right, when it comes to some of those bigger corporations, there is that like stark divide, and there does need to be, and that's kind of where the partnerships come in, and especially ones that are more specialized, where they have that connectivity to the like existing access to the fixed route network, in the sense of like your card and other forms of payment, and even greater subsidies for those low income or unbanked people, where it could, yeah.
And another comment from Professor McNally is there is a fundamental difference between profit-oriented TNCs and public service-oriented transit operations. So he thinks this is one of the reasons that it is very difficult to coordinate between the two, which may cause some equity issue. Do you have some more comments to add, Professor McNally?
No, I just wanted to point out that the experience in South Orange County at one point, when they were cutting back on Metrolink service because of low volumes, they thought that they might be able to, they were cutting back on transit service connecting to Metrolink because of low volumes. They were trying to fill in with, I believe it was Lyft at the time. And the problem was that public transit services are required by law to provide ridership data and information on the users, et cetera. Whereas the TNCs were quite the opposite. They did not want to provide that information because that was kind of their business model at the time. And it goes down to the basic difference between a company that's trying to make a profit as opposed to providing a service purely for the purpose of the service. And I think that could be a problem that's going to exist forever, because the TNCs are going to be much more expensive than public transit use, regardless of how much subsidy is being provided, if a subsidy can be provided to a for-profit company. I think that's a fundamental problem that maybe you haven't dealt with.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That was one of the findings in a lot of earlier partnerships. They heavily struggled with the deal of data sharing And some of them like even kind of collapse because there's no way to actually analyze the success of partnerships because companies like Lyft and Uber just refuse to share data. I think nowadays it's a little bit more amenable, but like generally still that issue pertains and is a big issue. I think when it comes to these partnerships, one thing I kind of like about the more so microtransit model and working in a public transit agency when I guess the funding and the demand is available to support this is that everything can be run in-house and you don't have to deal with that issue. But yeah, TNC partnerships by themselves do struggle with that.
So thanks, Dylan. And thanks for all the questions and comments from our audience. Let's welcome our third presenter, Mankin Law, and his topic is one of also my research interest on electric vehicle. And he will talk about spatial equity of EV charging station placement in the Orange County. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mankin, and I'm a second-year master's student in urban and regional planning. And today I'm gonna talk about my project advised by Dr. Visavori in examining electric vehicle charging station placement from an equity perspective. So we select Orange County as our study area to understand the spatial inequities of EV charging access. Orange County is one of the highest density regions in the country in terms of EV ownership and charging infrastructures. And the county is immensely heterogeneous in terms of income and population factors, making it an ideal place to study EV charging access and equity issues. And as of 2021, the county has over 78,000 registered EVs, but there's only about 5,800 existing public EVCS. So the current service coverage of the existing EV charging station is worth investigating, as well as the future infrastructure planning in this highly car-demanding county. So that this is how this study comes in. So in this study, we developed a machine learning framework to examine spatial disparities in EVCS placement by using a predictive approach. We first identified the essential socioeconomic factors that may contribute to spatial disparity in EV charging station access. Second, using these factors along with ground data from existing charging station placements, we predict the future density at multiple spatial scales using our machine learning algorithms and compare their predictive accuracy to identify the most optimal spatial resolution for our predictions. And finally, we compare the most accurately predicted charging station placement density with a spatial inequity indicator to quantify how equitable these placements would be for Orange County. So in this study, we aim to answer the following research question around equitable EVCS placements. So what are the socioeconomic and demographic factors that can quantify spatial inequity in EV charging station access? Which is the most appropriate spatial scale at which charging station placements can be predicted accurately after accounting for these factors? And how will future EVCS placements distribution vary spatially with existing inequities in place? So the overall spatial distribution of charging infrastructure can highlight the inequities in EV usage at smaller spatial scales, depending on the frequencies and densities of local deployment. And our study aims to bridge this gap using a machine learning approach. So combining data sources from EV charging station with socioeconomic and demographic factors, our study highlights the existing disparities and barriers accessing EV charging infrastructures. And then the machine learning algorithms are then used to generate a predictive maps of charging station placements and compare with different levels of spatial inequity to quantify the accessibility issues related to these placements. So in the data preparation phase, we combine data on the existing EV charging station socioeconomic features of neighborhoods at the census barcode level, and information on housing density, as well as summarize the spatial relationship in the collected data sets. So these variables were meaningfully chosen for quantifying charging station access, and they are pre-processed in GIS, and then we convert them to raster format, ensuring the spatial resolution of all the data layer matches. And we also ensure that the coefficient value in the variables are below 0.4. The feature classes listed on this table demonstrate the open data resources used for this analysis. For example, the charging station location collected from several sources converted to a raster format using kernel density estimation for matching it with other layers at the same scale and smoothing out the density distribution. So the KDE results were then categorized into 3 levels: high, medium, and low. And then these categories of charging station density were then used as a ground truth for training our machine learning models. So as I mentioned, the overall methodology of this study combines machine learning along with quantitative spatial analysis as described in this workflow diagram. So we first evaluate the existing charging station placement using the kernel density estimation and classify 3 levels of intensity based on the KDE results. Then we extract relevant variables from chosen sources and spatially jotted the features into different sizes of grids. And using the extracted variables and KDE classes, the next step is to apply the machine learning model fitting to predict the EVCS grids. So these procedures include testing the model accuracy using different training methods, confusion matrix comparison, and tuning the model performance repeatedly. And after that, the model with the highest accuracy will then be summarized into our spatial analysis with the relevant feature to determine whether communities have equitable access to charging stations. And lastly, we developed an equity index using a raster weighted overlay to demonstrate the disparities and compare them with the current infrastructure coverage. So if we look into this chart, we categorize the entire project into 6 big steps. First, in data processing, where we gather and process all the data and convert them into the same scale. The second step is where all the geoprocessing work is done. The third is where we utilize our machine learning models. The fourth step is where we predict the EV charging station density. A fifth step is we develop our equity index. And the last step is where we examine our findings altogether. So based on our modeling approach, the random forest model outperformed both the support vector machines and the multinomial logic in terms of the cross validation accuracy for the grids ranging from 1 to 5 kilometers. So the models become more uncertain in their prediction as we keep increasing the grid size, and we figure that the variance for grids over 4 kilometers becomes too large. So the socioeconomic factors will not be sufficient enough to predict placements at these scales as the population model become more heterogeneous as we increase the resolution. And in terms of our findings in the algorithms, the random forest at 3 kilometer grid size has the highest accuracy with the lowest variance. So we decided to choose that as our best model for the charging station placement prediction. Also, we generated a confusion matrix to distinguish the misclassification rates across the 5 grids, using it to gauge the accuracy as the spatial scale changed. And then we examined the spatial accessibility of the predicted charging station placements for Orange County using this weighted equity index and categorized the region into the 3 classes, as I mentioned, in low, medium, and high level of inequities that exist in each of the grid. So the EV charging inequity index demonstrate the variables that we classified, including areas with low vehicle ownership, high population density, high percentage of minority population, high percentage of people living below poverty levels, less access to education, and low medium household income. So these variables were categorized as the high inequity regions, And we have also ensured that most of the contextual factors that influence decision-making by planners in EV infrastructure investments are accounted for. So by mapping out the equity indicators, it revealed that the central part of Orange County near the cities of Santa Ana, some parts of Costa Mesa and Garden Grove appears to have higher inequity in charging station assets comparing to rest of the county. Suburb cities more like Newport, Huntington, Irvine, experiencing much lower inequities as the underlying population are homogeneous in terms of income levels, education level, as well as things like vehicle access. And based on our model prediction, some parts in the city of Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Orange would experience medium to high charging station placement in the future. But some city will still see low investment of infrastructures, as we can see on this map. The blue areas indicates the existing density of the charging stations. The darker blue regions means there are more services available. And on top of that, the red dots means regions experiencing high inequity are likely to need more investment on the infrastructures. So ideally, what we want to see here is the regions with the red dots to have the dark blue density behind them to accommodate adequate services. And clearly there are some works that is to be done. And if we look at the table, there are approximately 11% of Orange County experiencing high spatial inequity. And within that 11%, only 0.5% are located at the high density regions, 3.4% are in the medium density regions, and 7.8% are in the low density regions. So one of our suggestions here is to promote EVCS investments in these regions and targets to transform the high spatial inequity regions to have high EVCS placement density. So in this work, we present our machine learning framework for the prediction of EV charging station placements to address issues of spatial accessibility. And we believe that a combination of scalable machine learning approaches and decision-making tools has not been fully explored in equity analysis studies, especially in the context of EV charging access. And in our approach, we use a multi-criteria decision analysis, which is a relatively new approach in equity analysis. And it has not been applied to a similar EV charging station problem before. And it is a pretty well-established GIS method for site suitability applied to both public health issues and engineering problems. And lastly, the methods that we use are scale independent and generalizable. So it is suitable for planners or policymakers who are interested to replicate similar approach in qualifying the future charging station placements. And that's all I have. Any questions or comments?
Thanks for the presentation, Mankin. And any questions from our audience?
I have one question. Do you have any solution to this equality issue? Any suggestion how we can tackle this?
So our study looks into like we more look into like what are the issues, what are the equity issues that are relevant to the charging stations, and it has been a big problem, especially in Southern California. That's why I have listed many different variables that are relevant to equity. One solution that we are offering is our study will be a great approach for regional agencies like OCTA to look into like regions that with this equity issues, they can invest on more infrastructures on these regions. And yeah.
Thank you. When you count the channels, now some type of channels allow people to follow how you do that.
I'm sorry.
I think what he means is for some of the charger, it's slow chargers, say level 2.
Yeah.
Some of the DC faster charger. So how do you differentiate the inequity of these two type of chargers?
Yeah, we kind of look at both level 2 and the DC fast chargers together because we study only looks into the public chargers, like where all the we draw the data sources from Department of Energy, where the alternative fuel cell data. So they have data available for all the charging stations that are publicly available. But we kind of look at them together because they are both using for commercial usage, and I think it would be a good way to determine like more for like commuters that are coming into Orange County that charge their vehicles. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see two comments, one from Professor Keller. She says, electric vehicles for individual people are quite costly. So she guess the demand for EV charging stations is correlated with the household income. Say for example, higher household income area may have higher number of charging stations. Do you think that's what I mean? That's one of her comments or kind of questions. Do you think that's consistent with your research result?
Yes, that's why we have medium household income as one of our variables. And yeah, I do think that is the case. That's why we are seeing more charging station in cities like Irvine, Newport Beach. So yeah, the high incomes regions definitely have like more infrastructure because of the EV population in place.
Yeah, and another comment from Professor McNally is on both trip origins and destinations should be considered, since recharging may well be necessary on both sides, at both ends. Yeah, and any more comments from you, Professor McNally?
No, I just wanted to point out that when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about travel over space and time. And some of the conditions need to be considered at both ends. I mentioned this relative to the previous presentation. And it's not just where people are living and the demographics associated with that location, but it's also the other end of the trip, whether it's a commuting trip, whether it's a recreational trip, social trip, whatever. And of course, it depends on trip distances in terms of charging capabilities. I do understand the problems associated with people that don't own a house may not be able to install any kind of recharging thing in their own properties and stuff, and that could be a problem, but it could be addressed as well with local chargers. But then you have the issue of price as well that was raised by Professor Keller. Although I did see recently that according to what I read, the Tesla Model 3 prices are several $1,000s less than a comparable internal combustion engine car. Whether that was true or not, I wasn't able to verify. But those prices will come down when market sizes grow. So that may not be as much of an issue. The charging issue is kind of interesting because people have been talking lately about it should all be subsidized. Can you imagine if we found out that all the gas stations were subsidized? Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Professor.
I think another thing to consider is people might not want to charge in like low income areas because when you fill up your gasoline car, you're in and out of the gas station in under 10 minutes. Charging an electric vehicle could take like 30 minutes or longer. And people don't want to hang around in those neighborhoods because they're afraid they're going to be a victim of a crime. So they might rather go to like a higher income neighborhood where they're going to wait there for like 40 minutes because they're like, oh, I'm going to sit in my car. I can feel safe. It's something to consider.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for pointing out that.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation and all the comments. So that's all 3 student presentations for today. And so now the stage is mine, and thanks Vicky, Lauren, and ITS-UCI for organizing this seminar. Yeah. So now comes to the last presentation of today, which is supposed to be the keynote session of today. But I try to put some of my research and also some of the further research I may do or I may expect people to do for this presentation. So my name is Dingtong again.
and I'm now working as a postdoc in ITS-UCI with Professor Michael Hyland. And my major research interest is on crowdsourced delivery, which is the last mile delivery, and also the vehicle electrification, especially EV charging or some other zero emission vehicle related issues. And for today, my presentation is on the vehicle electrification in California. What are the findings and the challenges? So in California, we have so many regulations over these years on how we would like to electrify California to encourage the usage of EV. And we see that we have a mandate that they require 100% of new light and medium duty vehicles sold in the state to be zero emission in the year 2035. And they also require in 2035, 100% of zero emission drayage trucks. And they also expect 100% zero emission for medium and heavy duty vehicles in the states by 2045. So for all of these regulations or mandates, how did California do? And what are the challenges and research questions for us? So before that, let's look at what are the type of EVs we actually have for these days. So based on the vehicle type or the model, we can have from the small size vehicles, the personal use vehicles, the small sedan or wagons, to large pickup trucks, which can be used by person or by some companies. And then goes to the cargo vans, which are mainly used for last mile delivery for logistic companies and also large drayage trucks. And I also list out the current mileage, the current range of these different types of vehicles. And the range is basically an estimation based on or an average of different vehicle types. And especially for the drayage trucks, it can be very different depending on the load of the truck. So we see that for the small size, they are mainly personal vehicles, and the large size are mainly used for the commercial purposes. And if we compare the range of these vehicles with the range of their counterparts, the so-called conventional field vehicles, we can see that for the small size vehicles, the sedan and wagons, is getting very close to what we have nowadays for the conventional vehicles, let's call it CFV. And also, but however, for the larger vehicles, there is still a considerable large gap between the range of the EV version of the large vehicles comparing to their counterpart CFVs, especially for the drayage truck. So, and second, we would like to know the current charging technologies for our EVs. In the last presentation or the comments, some of the questions is related about the level of charging. So actually the charger types really designed how fast we can charge the vehicle. So currently on the market, we have basically 1, 2, and 3. So level 1 charger are mainly used for the households. Like if you install a charger at home, it's likely to be level 1 or level 2 charging. And for those chargers in UCI, currently we can see in our parking lots, they are mainly level 2 chargers. And so the major difference for these chargers is on the voltage and the efficiency of charging. And now we have the most commonly see faster charging, the so-called fast charging nowadays are the direct current fast charging, which are level 3 chargers. And also we have some chargers which are expected to come year soon. But they are now only in the lab, which are called the ultra fast chargers. And those chargers can, so for the current charging technology of faster charger, they can charge our vehicle from 0% to 80% in about 30 minutes to an hour. But ultimately, people are expecting to have the ultra faster charging, which can charge our vehicle from 0 to 8% to 80% in about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And so we can see that the major challenges in our EV in our EV usage is on the range and charging, because the range is mainly limited by the battery technology nowadays. And for the charging, the challenges for the charging are from first the infrastructure, how many chargers we have, as what we have for the previous presentation is the distribution, that whether the distribution of the charging stations is evenly distributed or is easily accessible. And also the second one is on the charging management. So that's one thing, say about when to charge, because people also need to plan their charging together with their trip purpose. So basically for all the charging questions, we can come to the three main questions, which they are when to charge, where to charge, and how much to charge. So for whatever research related to the charging parts, they will finally go to these three. And so what are the literature nowadays related to the EV charging area? So on the supply side, we mainly have two, which the first one is the location of the charging stations, which is just what the previous research did. So that's some of them study on how to place those charging stations, and some of them study whether, just like the previous one, whether those are evenly distributed, the equity issue in it. And another one is the electricity supply for the charging stations, because we are trying to make our charging stations the faster charging one. So ultimately we will have higher voltage, and when we have a higher number of higher voltage chargers, it will be a large burden for our grid, electricity grid. So that's another part they are looking at for the supply side. And on the demand side, we have how to model the behavior of charging and what's the preference of charging. It's especially when to charge and where to charge. And another one for the demand part is how to manage our charging, say whether we can use some pricing scheme or incentives to encourage people to charge in certain period of the day or in certain area. And in between link the two is the pricing of charging. So how people use the pricing mechanism to actually manage the supply and demand to balance the two. So the current or contemporary research topics in vehicle electrification, I separate them into two categories, one for personal vehicles, basically the small size vehicles, and the second one is the commercial vehicles, which are basically larger vehicles. So for the personal side, we have how to model the charging behavior and what's the charging scheduling and facility location for the charging stations and the price management. And also some of our researchers do the joint decision of the routing and charging, and also joint decision for charging and electricity supply. And for the commercial vehicle side, we also have similar thing for the routing of the vehicles, because especially for the logistics companies, the routing of the vehicles will impact both their expense and also their income of the company. So for the routing of the vehicles, we can basically see for the middle mile vehicles, they will consider their routing with charging. However, for last mile deliveries, they are more encouraged, or they are more trying to do the thing that to deliver the packages without the charging during their trips or over the day. So they try to charge when the vehicles are idle in the night. And also for commercial vehicles, they look at the charging facility locations, especially along the highway corridor, to accommodate the charging needs. And also similar as the routing of the vehicle, they consider of how to do the in-route charging. So the in-route charging is not only charge while you are driving to somewhere, but also they consider a more advanced technology of install the chargers along the highway while people are driving. They can charge their vehicle during some corridors. And the last one in the commercial vehicle side is the routing, scheduling, and charging, the joint decision of the three for the ride-share vehicles. So especially when in the future we have autonomous vehicle which supposed to be electrified, how can they do the charging and how can they do their routing, their service, while to satisfy the charge, while to not to violate the charging or the energy constraints for the vehicles. And let's get back to California and see how the situations in California go. So we can see here in the left-hand side, the table that California is actually the leading state in the United States for the vehicle electrification. So we have the largest number of vehicles that are EVs, and also the higher percentage in a country. And then on the left-hand side, we see the EV cells of the two different types of EVs, which is the battery EV use the electricity for entire trips and plug-in hybrid EVs cells. So we can see a huge jump after the year 2017. That's for the battery EVs. But and we can also see some increase and also a little drop for the plug-in hybrid EVs. So now the question comes to us that, do we have sufficient charging facilities to support the rapid cell increase in the EV part? And can we do something to help people charge more efficiently? Then comes to two of my research on the EV side. The first one is for the small or personal EV trips, which is a dynamic modeling and a real-time management of a system of EV fast charging stations. So we look at fast charging because we think, so first, because in the literature, most of the literature, they just mix the level 2 charging and fast charging together. But we think there's a necessity to separate the fast charging because ultimately we are trying to make a system that people can charge as fast as do the refill for the gas. So in this research, we try to model how people do their charging decision. So at the beginning, we see, we suppose some vehicles may have some charging needs, and then they may have an app, or they may, based on their knowledge, to choose from the nearby charging stations. So they may first have a candidate pool of the charging stations. Then they will do their choice within the pool of these charging stations. So to do the decision, they will have we apply a multinomial logic model here for their choice of charging stations. And after they make their decision, they will travel to the charging stations. And when they arrive at the charging station, they will make another decision of whether to join the queue if there are too many vehicles sitting in the charging stations already. So then on the charging station side, we try to describe the behavior or the operation of the charging station using a queuing model. So and this, yeah. So to actually verify our model, we did a case study in the Los Angeles and Orange County area. So currently in California, the biggest three charging systems are the Tesla fast charging, the Tesla charging system, and ChargePoint and EVgo. We choose one of them, which is the EVgo charging system. And this research was done in the year 2020 and 2021. 2019 and 2020. So during that time, we have 28 charging stations in the two counties, and which is about 288 chargers. And we did a huge simulation with from the time 10 a.m. Sorry, it's actually 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. a 12-hour simulation of it. So we collected the trips of the people in Orange County and Los Angeles County from CSTDM, California statewide travel demand model. And basically we generate a couple of trips, and we have a trip origin and destination for this passengers or drivers. And along their way to their destination, they may have a need of charging. So then they start to choose their charging stations. And we have two assumptions. The first one is the charging demand the charging demand follows a Poisson distribution, and the service time of vehicle follows its negative exponential distribution. So these two assumptions enable us to make the queuing theory, to make the queuing model in a charging station part. And I would like to show some results from the simulation. So for the first one, apart from the model that we try to model the charging behavior, we also try to use three pricing schemes which can encourage or discourage the use of certain charging stations, which we have the linear control, quadratic control, exponential control, and quadratic control. And so on the most left-hand side, it's the base scenario where no control is there. We can actually see on the edge of the Los Angeles County, which on the northwestern side, and also along the I-5 corridor, we can see a higher demand for the faster charging needs, which is actually somehow consistent with the previous research that for this area, we may need more charging stations or chargers. And we can also see by applying some of the pricing schemes, we can actually, we can have a efficient control over the usage of the stations. And we also have some customer waiting time comparison and social welfare comparison in this research. And the second one I would like to talk about is the vehicle electrification in the commercial area, which is especially for the last mile delivery. So that's the package delivery with mixed vehicle energy type fleets. So in this study, the major motivation is that after the mandate of the electrification, the logistic companies start to purchase electric vehicles for their last mile delivery. So in the next 15 to 20 years, we're probably going to see a mixed vehicle or a mixed fleet for last mile delivery. Then the question comes to how should logistic companies plan for their mixed fleets in terms of vehicle acquisition? And our research goal is to develop a modeling and analysis approach to optimize and evaluate the mix of EVs and CFVs in the last mile package delivery fleet and the vehicle route of both EVs and CFVs providing the last mile fleet delivery services. And we use mainly 3 evaluation metrics, which are the operating cost, vehicle miles traveled, and projected carbon emission. So similarly, let's describe the problem first. So in this problem, we have a single depot and service area, and to simplify this question, we just do a cluster of all those delivery locations as nodes. So in this map, we can see each nodes represent an area where a certain number of deliveries needs to be delivered. And we have travel costs between nodes, and also since a node is representing an area, we also have a travel cost within the node. And we have a fleet consists of the conventional field vehicles and EVs. And we have different operating costs for CFVs and EVs. And our objective is to minimize in the total delivery cost, because we are now standing in the shoes of the logistics companies. And to model this problem, we apply a fleet size and mixed vehicle routing problem. One which is a deviation of the vehicle routing problem, which we have a binary decision variable, the xijk. And here is our objective function, which has 2 parts. The first one is the total cost of the EV, and second one is the total cost of CFV. We want to minimize the summation of the two. And we have the different constraints. It's similar for the vehicle routing problem. And we also conduct a numerical study for the Los Angeles and Orange County area, where we choose 70 delivery nodes, and for each node, it has 20 to 30 delivery locations in it. And the 3 metrics we use are the fleet mix, the vehicle miles traveled, and the emission. And also we have 2 parameters to change or to vary to test the different scenarios, which are the actual EV range and the cost between the CFV and EVs. So the major findings for this one is that we find that under current technology for the last mile delivery vehicles, which has a range about 100 miles to 120 miles, it's very hard to achieve a full electrification under the current battery technology. In order to achieve full electrification for the last mile delivery vehicles, the EV range needs to reach at least 200 miles. And under current technology, we may only see 60% of the vehicles are electrified. And also we did a scenario analysis or sensitivity analysis between the CFV EV cost ratio and the usage and the fleet mix. So we did that one for both EV range equals 100 miles and this one EV range equals 160 miles. So under the 2 different scenarios, we can see when the CFV EV cost ratio increase, which means EV becomes more preferable or CFV or EV is much cheaper. It becomes more cheaper than the cost of using a CFV. We can see an increasing trend of using EVs in the two cases. The shapes are the shapes are and the trend are similar, but the shapes are a little different. And the major thing I would like to point out here is when the cost of the CFV and EV reaches 1.6, which means CFV using a CFV per mile is 1.6 times of the per mile cost of an EV. As we fix the fleet size for the logistic companies, it's very hard to change the fleet mix or the choice of the fleet for the company. So which actually gives a clue for the policymaker or the governments when they make the decision of subsidizing the EV usage. So which means under the current technology or when the most efficient point of subsidize the EV is to make it to make the CFV 1.6 times of the cost of EV, which means the EV is 60 to 70% cost of the CFV. And the third study we did is on the VMT. So basically we can see under the current technology of EV or when the EV range has had the range of 160, we can see the more usage of the EV than when the EV range reaches 160, we can see more usage of EV than the current technology of only range of 100. However, the total VMT is also increasing when the number of EV is used. But we will see that in the next slide. Since we replace CFV with EV, so some of the emissions are actually reduced because EV is supposed to be zero emission here. And in total, we can see that under the current technology of 100-mile technology, that when we apply EV in the last mile delivery fleet, it can help decrease the total emission by 20%. And when the EV range increase to 160 miles, the emission can be reduced by 45%. So that's a major findings for these two studies. And for this presentation, a brief summary is that we try to look at the findings and challenges in the vehicle electrification in California, and I give some recent research topics of the EV studies and two research of mine. And thank you for listening. And any questions? Yeah.
I think one of the carbon dioxide emissions with the conventional vehicles, usually consider the electricity, the carbon dioxide produced by
Yeah, I see what you mean. So you are saying that since electricity, the generation of electricity is not entirely green one, so we probably could, yeah, I mean, so for that comparison, it's mainly based on the telepipe emission comparison. It's not the overall comparison, but I do agree that for the overall planning of this, we should also look at the generation of the electricity. Yeah, but that's not within the scale of this study.
Why didn't you include the Inland Empire in your study area? I think it would be especially meaningful in your the first thing you presented about the queue lengths at charging stations. I noticed that many of the high queue length occur on the county border. And could that be due to like such a high amount of the commutes or going over the county line? Maybe extend the study area, would it change it?
Could you repeat the question? So
yes, I mean, okay. The study area neglects a large amount of the commuters for Los Angeles and Orange County. The study area you chose. And especially in the first the first project you presented, where you're talking about the queue lane at EV chargers, I noticed many of the high queue lengths, you circled them, occurred on, yeah, see on the border of the Inland Empire and Los Angeles, inside the circle, right?
Right.
And also on the border of Los Angeles and Ventura County. Do you think, because both of those are major commuting gateways into Los Angeles, if you included the farther suburbs, would you still see that pattern?
You mean if we extend our study area to further, say, maybe includes Riverside County?
Yeah, Riverside, San Bernardino.
Yeah, so we may still see a similar pattern of this.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, you know, I think a better thing we could do is we may have a larger area to do the simulation, to have a larger simulation to see how the trips in between, because for one limitation of this one is when we consider the trips, we are mainly consider the trips within this. We did include some of the trips which are from other county to both Los Angeles and Orange County, but I think 70% of the trips are the trips within the two counties. So if we try to enlarge the study area and include more trips in it, we probably will see a different pattern of it. Yeah.
I think it's probably not a coincidence that the congestion at the border of the congestion.
Right.
Yeah, for now question that's let's say like during the simulation both of these studies, how many trips you created in this like large network, and what percentage of these trips are like with EVs?
Oh yeah, so 100% of trips are EVs. So we don't really consider the congestion effect of the trips. And for the question, how many trips are there? I really couldn't remember the exact number, but that's a huge number.
Huge number, probably like 10,000.
Yeah, more than 10,000.
And then like you do not consider the congestion levels of the network and just push those trips like into the network and to see the queuing.
No, we don't consider the congestion effect of it.
And then put that in.
No, but you know, one thing is we did consider for the travel. So the interesting thing is we didn't include so when we calculate the travel time from the origin to destination, we use the shortest path. We don't consider congestion. But when they travel from their origin to a chosen charging station, we actually have their travel time depending on the time, because we didn't do a real-time routing for them, but we have different travel time for over different period of day. So it's because we separate the day into morning peak, midday, afternoon peak, and evening one. So for different time of the day, we actually have a different travel time for them to travel from their origin to the charging station.
How these travel time?
Say it again.
How these travels have calculated?
How this travel time calculated? If I'm not wrong, I think we should obtain this travel time depending on either whether it's from Google or it's depending on some other source to separate the date of different time periods. So what I'm saying is we didn't really directly consider the congestion, but we have something related to the impact of the congestion on their travel time.
Thank you so much.
How do you actually model the demand of charging? Do actually, I would assume that must be related with their charge level of the car. So actually like track the charge level of each car.
Yes, we did. So at the beginning, we give each car a random starts above 50 or 60% of the charge of their starting SOC state of charge, and over their so for over their entire trip, not entire trip. So when they have their charging needs, so basically we update their charging needs after after a certain period of time to see whether they actually have the charging needs. So and we have a decision that not everybody gonna charge at 20%. So somebody may just say, I will charge when it's come to close to 0%. So somebody may say, oh, I feel unsafe when the SOC is below 40%. So I may charge at 40%. So we also have a choice of that for different passengers.
You actually consider that some people would never charge, like if they do a commute trip, but their commute distance is actually shorter than the range of the car, then they'll probably
they probably won't charge. So basically, that's whether their SOC will trigger their needs of charging.
Oh.
Yeah, Simon.
At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about the usage of EV and traditional vehicles.
Right.
And you talk about two directions. One is passenger use, maybe individual use, and another is commercial use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that from your presentation, it's like there are actually many goods delivery companies. Actually, up to now, EV has been used for like a great proportion of goods delivery. But currently, I think intuitively in our daily life, there are very few like EVs being used for Uber or Lyft. So what do you think about this question? And what's the scenario, or say to what extent if you think that EV will be used for Ubers and Lyft as commercial use?
That's actually a very interesting question, because for both Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, those either they are rideshare or food delivery, they are outsourced. So their vehicles are basically outsourced. So and an interesting thing we may look at is whether the percentage of EV usage in this rideshare or outsourced or crowdsourced delivery service is consistent with the total percentage of EV in the entire fleet, to see whether people are intend to use EV to do this kind of service or not. So that's actually a very interesting research which could be done later. And come to your question that when the EVs will be used for Uber, Lyft type of service, then my thinking is it's depending on how much Uber and Lyft would like their fleet to be electrified. Say they may use some incentive to encourage people use of EV, or they may give some policy that they are trying to have some quota for the number of EVs registered for this type of service. So that's totally depending on the choice of the crowdsourced companies or the TNCs.
To build a model to predict what scenario or to what's condition, like Uber and like people would prefer to use EV for like Uber and Lyft, including those kind of DoorDash delivery, Uber Eats.
It's possible, depending on from what aspect you are looking at the problem. If we just look from the business side, if they are incentive driven, so then the only thing they're going to consider is whether using the EV is going to help them save the cost. Then based on this, we may develop a model, say whether encourage usage of EV or setting some quota or incentive for EV usage going to help that. So, but from other perspective, I currently don't have a quick answer for that.
I mean, California has the same milestone. So by 2030, 90% of round miles must be electric.
Yeah, so if that comes to the mandate, then for the charging, not charging comes for the crowdsourced companies, they may have some other measurements for doing that. Yeah. So I think that comes to the end of this seminar. So thank you for coming today. And also we have another one in our spring quarter. And remember to register and participate.
Did you want to share some kind of thoughts, maybe some inspirations for our next generation of transportation scholars?
I really enjoyed the presentation from our students today. And I think some of them really covered the actual contemporary issue of the days, especially inequity. And it considers different aspects of transportation of urban planning, which is what we need for for the next 10 to 20 years. And so what the final words I'm gonna say is they are very interesting. So when you have an idea, just try to do it and try to implement, talk to practitioners, talk to our researchers. Thank you for coming today. Yeah. And thanks Vicky and Lauren for organizing this.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, studio audience, virtual audience, and hope to see you on May 5th, if not sooner. May 5th is our next set of student presentations. These will be focused on doctoral research. Thanks, everyone. Okay. So one thing I'm going to do is we recording today.
Yes, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
And putting it we can use it, you can get attached to your so what we'll do.
Oh, yeah.
You'll see if there's something that, we all